So several years ago, I was waiting for a hotel shuttle outside of my hotel, and a man pulled up in the front entrance in a red Corvette Lamborghini. I, I guess the parking spot right in front of the hotel entrance is reserved for Lamborghinis. Who knew? But what caught my attention was there was a toddler standing outside, and he was wrapped by this car, and he kept saying with this breathy, reverent tone, "Wow, wow," and he was clearly delighted. So I'm Jillian Hudson, the owner of Beautiful Forks Consulting, and I want to talk to you in non-jargony terms about user experience and why it's important. And today's topic is user delight. With me today is Norah Medlin, a business process improvement and fractional operations expert with a background in software engineering. Over 2 decades of experience in higher education, government, medical, and legal sectors, where accessibility standards are essential, Norah has a proven track record of delivering inclusive, user-centered solutions. She has a deep understanding of business processes and focuses on what truly matters to users. I want to talk with her today on the topic of user delight because I find her insight as a non-UXer adds a lot to the ongoing user experience conversation. So back to the toddler. What I was thinking at the time as he was doing this is that he reminds me of all of the non-users' reactions to user design, user experience. They're interested in the bells and the whistles, the flashy, the red shiny, and so forth, but they're not the user. Sexy is in the eye of the beholder, even in applications. So, the sexy and the glamorous often gets all the attention, but that's not what the users need, and it's not what they're interested in, and they need so much more than what we can give them if we focus on that. No, a lot of times the people who are making the decisions, from the CEO down to product, down to development, even UX teams, we're not the users. None of us are the users. So when I'm doing research and design for users and everything, it's important to get what they need. Now, I mostly work on apps that slice and dice big data into consumable pieces based on the end user's needs. And I know it's not real sexy to you and me, and unfortunately not to CEOs, but it's when I get it right and, the user says wow in that breathy tone, that's all I need to hear. User delighted? Check. So, let's keep in mind here that the users are delighted by more functional experience than bells and whistles. They have a task they're trying to perform, and anything that we're doing that gets in the way of that in order to impress some naive or uninformed person, i.e. a toddler or a CEO, not sorry, we're not getting it right for the user. They have higher needs and higher functions that we need to be paying attention for them. So user delight is for the users. It's not for anybody else. So Norah, that's my stake in the sand. That's my red line. Now, I know you have some interesting perspectives. Tell me what you think.
Yeah, honestly, I think you're absolutely right. It's interesting coming from a technical standpoint. Being a software developer for many years, prior to operations, and continuing into operations, I see this a lot, where there is this focus or this tendency to run audits, technical audits, let's say, on a website that will produce some results and tell you about things that you may want to pay attention to in order to provide some sort of accessibility requirement that your website, let's say that you're in the education sector and you have some sort of particular requirement for adhering to accessibility. And you'll get lots of interesting information that you can bring back to your team and get up to this sort of standard, right? But it's not the whole story. I think that I'm recalling a specific situation back a couple of years ago. I attended conference in Atlanta, and a professor, Laura Palmer of Kennesaw State, had a session on accessibility, and she called it Accessibility Beyond Checklists. And it was really this idea of, coming from a technical or to the technical audience, that we really should be thinking more about that user experience, that it's not just about if the screen reader can read the page. It should be about, what's that workflow look like? Maybe, if there's neurodivergency in your audience that you might need to address, especially in the case of some flashy graphics that might be distracting or something to that effect. It really depends upon what that purpose is. And I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about how this kind of works from a UX perspective. And so really, give me your knowledge. I'd love to hear from the UX perspective. I work with UXers, but like you said, I'm not a UXer myself. And I think there's all sorts of really strategic-minded things that come from the UX side that are very valuable for the end users that I am trying to bring delight to.
That's awesome. What you reminded me of is, first of all, we have a saying that accessibility is for everybody. The things that you do to make it accessible for the people who need the accessibility accommodations and everything also make it work better for everybody else. So there's no reason not to do it. But most often in UX, when we're thinking about accessibility, we are thinking about the front end. We're thinking about what you can see. And we're not thinking about the screen readers, which is sort of the opposite. We're expecting that the engineers will take care of that, but we have no way of knowing unless we have enough bandwidth and tools and resources to run accessibility testing to verify that the screen readers are working and everything. And I've worked at several places where that just didn't exist. So it's an unfortunate side effect. I hope someday it will become not a nice to have, it'll be a required to have. That's what I'd like to see happen.
I would say from my perspective, working with web agencies, as they call themselves, that especially when it's like a higher education client or a government client, the reason why they do accessibility scans is because they're required, they're mandated to do it. They're concerned about legal reasons behind it.
As they should be.
As well.
Yeah.
And so there's usually a drive only in those cases. If you're a startup that is just coming up with some new idea for your company, and you have this sort of experience that you want to give these users that are going to, let's say, your website or whatnot, it might not be forefront in your mind that it's important. And so you're right. I mean, I think that accessibility for everyone is for everyone. That is definitely a perspective from an accessibility standpoint. I've heard a lot, especially from this Laura Palmer that I mentioned. But I think that what was really intriguing to me is really that user experience workflow piece, and how bringing this perspective of it's not just about those checklists. It really should start with, like, what is that strategy? What kind of audience you have? And so tell me more about your story.
I'm really excited to hear you talk about workflow, because most often that is something that we don't see development thinking about in a lot of cases. And I'm glad to see that you're thinking about it, and that you're encouraging other people to think about it as well. One of the major jobs that UX has is making sure that the workflow happens in the right order to match what the user is actually trying to do. You wouldn't believe how many applications that I've looked at, and the user is going down the form, filling out the information, they fill out something down here, and it changes something up here. So then they have to scroll back up to make the change up here, and then have to find back where they were and go back. Why? This is terrible. And a lot of times I see it's even worse. We think about the customer experience, the external user experience. And there's an internal user experience as well. And I have worked on a lot of apps that were used by internal users of the company that don't get the same kind of attention, but it's to the company's detriment to not make these applications both more accessible and also more user delight. How many times have you been on a call with customer service and they're like, can you hold on for a moment? I'm sorry, my system is running slow. Or I'm sorry, it crashed and now I have to reboot it, or whatever it is. That is also impacting your customer experience. But it's impacting your internal users, your employee experience as well. And people don't see that as, or companies, I should say, don't see that as being part of the user delight, the usability, the accessibility of the application in the way that they should, because that impacts everybody. It makes the company look less professional. It frustrates the customer because they're waiting, but it also frustrates the user and it makes them less productive if they're working with a system that doesn't take into account these things. So, but I know you have some interesting resources for accessibility. Tell me about those, because I think that people who are interested in it, and I think that there should be more collaboration between engineering and UX to meet both sides of the user delight accessibility issues on the front end and on the back end. Tell me about those resources.
Well, yeah, I think maybe here with the call or with the recording, we'll have a description where I'll have you list out the Laura Palmer and her talk on accessibility beyond checklists. That's one to check out for sure. Also, I really, there's this one podcast that I follow pretty religiously. It's a monthly pre-recording that they do, and a video sort of podcast, right? And it's called Alley Talks. We call it Alley. It's accessibility. It's short for accessibility, and it's actually spelled a little differently than you might think. A11Y Talks.com for anyone that's listening. But I would say that they are a great resource to take a look at their podcast. Their January talk was called Suckometer, a new way of measuring accessibility. So they're a fun group, but really it's not just about the technical aspects. It's also about this sort of understanding that user experience is really important, and you have to come from different perspectives in order to provide this experience to all sort of walks of life, and so it's inclusive in that way. And yeah, there's other resources on the technical side that I could mention. I would say from a standards perspective, probably the biggest standards group is WCAG. I have to look up exactly what it stands for.
We just call it. I think we call it YCAG or WCAG.
Yeah, it stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So it's a set of standards as an organization that sets these standards, and there's all sorts of tools out there that you could use. I can't say that I would recommend any one in particular. I think there's some really great ones out there, but most of them are on the same level of quality, I would say, from a technical perspective. So any of them are a good resource. But just in general, that the WCAG standard is the standard that most web and digital agencies will use in order to provide that sort of certification for a website when there is a regulatory need. And there's different levels of standard that you can adhere to that they have outlined in their whole thing. And so being certified is a whole, I will tell you, from a technical perspective, just going through the certification process to become WCAG, how did you say it on your end?
WCAG, yeah.
Okay. Certified it's lengthy, and because there are so many different kinds of elements that can be affected, and or technically, have to be addressed, and so that takes quite a bit of time. Other than those two, I think I would say, I'm not sure that I have any particular other resources to mention, but just generally speaking, having some sort of wireframing tool is really important as well, especially for websites. Something like a Figma or a Sketch or a Adobe XD, which is on its way out, I guess. But something like that is a really great tool as well.
They often have plugins for accessibility to help. You haven't mentioned the most important tool, which I think is right here.
Okay, there we go.
Yes, the people who are trained and experienced, and I'm not pointing to my brain, I'm pointing to everybody's brain.
Sure.
But especially, designers and engineers who are experienced in this, there are whole specialties and focuses on accessibility to make sure you get it right. And if you don't have a dedicated resource in your company and you're working on this issue and everything, you need to get one, would be my advice. Bring in a consultant, bring in someone who's an expert. I am not an expert, but I'm very aware that I'm not an expert. So I do the best I can and raise awareness when I think that there's an important issue that needs to be addressed. But I don't consider myself an expert. I think it's very important to get it right. I have seen the effects of what happens when the color blindness issue, especially that's obviously the one that I see the most, comes into play, where they can't tell the difference between the buttons, they can't tell, the colors on the map, and read what the information there. It's a huge, not only is it a poor user experience, it's a huge liability risk for the company. So if you think paying for a consultant to get some accessibility cover for your applications is expensive, try a lawsuit.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So
Yes,
pretty much.
Yeah.
So companies should absolutely care.
I'll be honest. I think in some cases, especially, this shouldn't be something that should scare people. Like this is not something like I have a business idea and I want to put up a website and I should be afraid to do so because I might not be compliant. I think it really depends upon what your company is, who your audience is. If let's say that your audience is you're in the healthcare industry and your audience is a physically disabled or some other kind of sector that would benefit from accessibility guidelines, that's when you really need to care right away.
Yeah.
But I think that when it comes to accessibility or user experience, if you will just not see the success that you want to see if you don't take those things into mind, and then you launch your product without those things in mind. You will not see the success. You will not reach the goals that you are looking for.
Well,
people aren't happy with the experience that they have, right?
In my last video, I talked about the risks, the mitigating risk that UX can do for a company. And one of my points was that if you get accessibility right, it is actually a competitive advantage in your field. Because if you have users that need that, and you've shown that you've taken the time and the effort to do it right, you've got a loyal audience there. They're going to go with you, and price is not the big issue here. The experience exceeds the cost in most cases. And so if, all other things being equal, and you've got the accessibility user experience for them, and the other your competitor doesn't, you win. It's just that simple. You will have a loyal audience because you have taken time that almost nobody else has taken to make sure that they're fully capable of getting everything out of your website or your app that you have. So, there's not just it's not just a stick. I want to give the companies a carrot as well. There are benefits to it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
And I think what I was thinking from the project management standpoint and, working with sort of iterative
mhm.
improvements, it's never too late. Just
No.
because your website or your product
Hmm.
isn't accessible right now doesn't mean that you have to throw it away and start a whole new company or anything crazy. You just improving it, um, will create these sort of experiences
Hmm.
and success factors that you might not have been able to reach before, right?
Hmm. Absolutely. I love that. Let's end on that note. It's never too late to improve the accessibility or user delight of your users. So let's end it there. So at this point, I want to let you know that again, I am the owner of Beautiful Forks Consulting. I am available for consulting on any of your research needs, any of your research team training needs. I specialize in UX research and strategy. I also spend an awful lot of time mentoring other UXers on ADP lists, so I'm available for both those things. Nora, I want to give you an opportunity to plug your services as well, so go for it.
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Jillian. It's always a
Mm-hmm.
joy to speak with you. I hope that I'll have the opportunity to work with you again in the future. But yes, I am what I call a fractional operations professional, and I help out web agencies and other businesses with their marketing strategy into their operations strategy, that sort of thing. You can find me on LinkedIn. We'll provide some links to mine as well. You can also find me under my handle TechNorah. So TEKNORAH anywhere, technorah.com, TechNorah on Facebook, TechNorah on LinkedIn. That's who I am. But yes, please, feel free to reach out if you have any technical concerns and/or operations concerns about your accessibility and or technical needs of your products.
Awesome. And thank you so much for agreeing to help me record this message so we can get that out. I really appreciate it. I see many other future conversations about accessibility for us.
Awesome. Thanks, Julia.
All right.